The ballroom was dripping in diamonds and champagne until the groom's cruel little joke pulled up to the front door in a stretch limousine, and it backfired so hard the entire room went silent. At the Crystal Marquis Hotel, Derek Holloway stood tall in his custom tux, ready to marry Sloane Mercer, a spotlight-hungry model who loved the cameras almost as much as she loved his money. But Derek wasn't just celebrating. He was hunting for one last victory, humiliating his ex-wife, Lena Parker, the woman he'd divorced, drained of savings, and left pregnant with triplets. He wanted her to walk in looking broken. He wanted the guests to laugh. Instead, the doors swung open and Lena stepped in, like she owned the air. Sapphire gown. Chin lifted. 3 small children in matching outfits at her side. Derek's children. And beside her, the city's most untouchable billionaire investor, Graham Sterling, his hand steady at the small of her back. Derek tried to sneer anyway. Borrowed dress, he joked loud enough for the room. A few nervous laughs cracked, then died. Graham didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He placed a black folder on the nearest table and calmly revealed financial records, embezzlement, offshore transfers, money laundering Derek's empire, paid for with stolen cash, including tonight's wedding. Sloane's smile shattered. She yanked off her ring and walked out, leaving Derek exposed. When uniformed officers marched in with an arrest warrant, Derek's perfect night collapsed into handcuffs and flashing lights. And in the stunned quiet, Lena finally breathed triplets clinging to her hands, no longer the discarded ex, but the woman who survived the fire and walked back in as the storm. But here's the part the room didn't see, because Derek and Sloane had rehearsed her humiliation like it was choreography. Days before the wedding in their penthouse suite, Sloane lounged on a velvet chaise with a flute of champagne, scrolling through guest lists like they were trophies. "Are you sure she'll come?" she asked, eyes glittering. Derek adjusted his cufflinks in the mirror, smug. Lena's too proud to ignore an invitation. Curiosity will drag her here. Sloane's smile sharpened. Good. Then make sure she feels it. I want the cameras on you, and her standing behind you like a shadow. She tapped the seating chart with a manicured nail. Put one chair in the very back, one. Let everyone wonder why it's there. Derek laughed, soft, cruel. And after the vows, I'll make a toast. Something sweet, something that sounds grateful. He leaned closer, voice dropping. Like thanking the people who stood by me, when others couldn't. Sloane clinked her glass against his. They'll know exactly who you mean. They even planned the angle. The photographer Derek bribed. The gossip-hungry socialites placed at the nearest table. The moment Lena walked in wearing something too small for their world, Sloane would tilt her head, smile for the flashes, and let the room do the rest. That was the script. A broken ex-wife, a triumphant groom, a glittering new bride. Only Derek miscalculated one thing: Lena didn't come to beg for air. She came with a storm at her back, and the instant that limo door opened, every wicked line they'd practiced started collapsing, like a stage set made of cardboard catching fire under the truth. Before Lena Parker ever stepped into that limousine, her life had already been stripped down to survival. She didn't grow up with privilege. No trust fund. No safety net. Just a small-town mother who worked herself raw and taught Lena that love wasn't roses. It was showing up even when you were exhausted. So when Derek Holloway came along, older, polished, promising a better life, Lena believed him. She married him. She quit her receptionist job to keep his world running smoothly. Dinner on time. Shirts pressed. Smiles in public. She thought that's what loyalty looked like. Then the pregnancy test changed everything. Triplets, Lena cried with joy. Derek didn't. His eyes turned cold, calculating like she'd handed him a bill instead of a miracle. "You can barely take care of yourself," he snapped. "How are you supposed to raise 3? And just like that, the man who once called her his forever threw her out like yesterday's trash. One suitcase, one swollen belly, nowhere to go. While Derek flashed designer watches and toasted new investors, Lena slept on a friend's couch, with her hands wrapped around her stomach, whispering into the dark, "I've got you, no matter what." She cleaned offices at night until her back screamed, folded laundry until her fingers cracked, skipped meals so formula would last. Strangers stared. Some pitied her. Some judged her. None of them paid the rent. When the babies came, 2 boys and a girl, Lena's world became a blur of bottles, blankets, and breathless nights. She rocked them through tears she refused to let them see. And somewhere in that hunger and heartbreak, something hardened into steel, because Lena didn't just survive being abandoned. She learned how to stand without him. By the week of the wedding, Lena Parker wasn't thinking about revenge. She was thinking about endurance, one more shift, one more grocery run, one more night of 3 little voices needing her at once. Derek's invitation sat on her scratched kitchen table, like a dare its gold trim mocking the peeling wallpaper and the stack of overdue bills. She held it once, pressed it to her chest, and felt 2 emotions collide, rage and fear. Because she knew the trap. She could already hear the laughter in that ballroom. Feel the eyes sliding over her bargain coat, the worn shoes, the quiet shame people love to dress up as concern. She pictured Derek's smile, the one that said, "You're nothing without me," while Sloane stood beside him like a trophy, sparkling and cruel. Lena's stomach twisted. Her hands shook. For a long moment, she almost tore the invitation in half. Then a soft whimper came from the bedroom. She walked in and saw the triplets, half asleep, hair sticking up cheeks, warm and innocent. One tiny hand reached for her like it was the most natural thing in the world, like she was still the safest place on earth. Lena scooped them close, breathing in that baby-sweet scent, and something inside her shifted. Not confidence, resolve. "If I go," she whispered into the dim light, "I'm not going to crawl. I'm not going to let them see me break." She returned to the kitchen, set the invitation down flat, and stared at it like it was an opponent. Outside, rain ticked against the window. Inside, Lena wiped her face, straightened her shoulders, and made a decision that felt like stepping off a cliff. She would face Derek Holloway, but she would not walk into that room alone. The next morning, Lena Parker opened her apartment door and froze, because the man standing in that dim hallway didn't belong in her world of cracked linoleum and second-hand furniture. Graham Sterling, the billionaire whose name whispered through charity galas and boardrooms like a warning. He didn't smile like Derek did. No performative charm. Just a steady, weathered calm, like someone who'd already survived storms most people never talk about. His gaze flicked past Lena to the scattered toys, the tiny shoes by the wall, the 3 little lives she'd been holding together with sheer will. "I'm not here to pity you," he said quietly. "I'm here because I know what cruelty does. And I know what it costs to endure it." Lena's throat tightened. "I don't want charity." Graham nodded once. "Good. Because this isn't charity. It's justice." He stepped closer, lowering his voice as if he didn't want her children to hear the word fear in the air. "Derek Holloway wants you in that room so he can watch you shrink. So don't go in shrinking." Lena looked down at her hands, raw from work, trembling from sleepless nights. "I can't walk into that hotel like this," she whispered. "Not with them staring." Graham's eyes didn't waver. "Then don't walk in like his victim." Outside her window, a sleek black limousine waited at the curb like a door to another life. Inside, hangers of gowns swayed gently with the motion of the car. A stylist waited. Tiny formal outfits for the triplets were folded with care. Lena's breath caught. Graham offered his hand. "Tonight you don't beg for dignity. You arrive with it." The limousine glided toward the crystal marquee, like a black arrow slicing through the rain and straight into the spotlight Derek Holloway thought he controlled. Inside, Lena Parker sat rigid at first, palms damp triplets tucked close beside her in their tiny formal outfits. The stylist had worked fast, soft curls pinned just right, a sapphire gown that made Lena's tired reflection disappear and a stronger woman take her place. One of the boys leaned forward, eyes wide. "Mom, are we in trouble?" Lena swallowed, then smiled like she meant it. "No, sweetheart. We're going to be brave." Across from her, Graham Sterling watched the hotel lights grow larger in the tinted window. "You know what makes a storm powerful?" he asked quietly. Lena shook her head. "It doesn't ask permission," Graham said. "It just arrives." The limo slowed. Outside, photographers were already stacked along the entrance like hungry birds, flashes popping for every wealthy guest stepping out of a luxury car. But the second their driver opened Lena's door, the chaos snapped into a single breath. Heads turned, cameras swung. The air changed. Lena stepped down onto the curb, heels clicking like a countdown. Her spine straight. Chin lifted. The triplets followed 2 little boys and a little girl, hands linked matching outfits. Crisp faces, innocent. Graham stepped out last, placing a steady hand at Lena's back. Not possessive, protective. Inside the ballroom, laughter was still floating over champagne when the doors began to open. And then, silence. Music stumbled. Glasses paused midair. Because the poor ex-wife Derek, invited to destroy, had just arrived, like royalty bringing 3 living reminders of his betrayal. And a billionaire who looked like he'd come to collect a debt. Derek Holloway recovered first because bullies always do. He smoothed the front of his tux like he could iron out the shock, then strolled toward Lena with a champagne flute raised, wearing that same smile he used right before he twisted the knife. "Well, well," he called, loud enough for half the ballroom to hear. "Look who decided to show up." Sloane Mercer tightened her grip on his arm, diamonds flashing as she leaned in with a fake sweet laugh. "I almost didn't recognize you," she said, eyes sliding over Lena's gown like she wanted to find a stain. "Did you borrow that?" A few guests chuckled thin, nervous sounds that died the moment Lena's triplets stepped closer to her legs. The little girl blinked up at Derek, confused by the tension. One boy whispered, "Mom, is that him?" Lena's throat tightened, but she didn't move. She just placed a steady hand on each small shoulder. "Stay right here," she murmured, voice calm, eyes forward. Eyes. Derek circled like he owned the air. "And you brought the kids," he said, tilting his head. "What is this Lena a sympathy tour? Hoping someone writes you a check." Lena's fingers curled old shame, trying to crawl back into her chest. Then Graham Sterling stepped in quiet as a closing door. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. "You keep using the word sympathy," Graham said, eyes fixed on Derek. "But the woman beside me isn't here to beg," Derek scoffed. "And who are you supposed to be?" Graham's expression didn't change. "The man standing next to her. Because you chose not to." The room shifted. Shoulders turned. Whispers sparked like dry paper. And for the first time all night, Derek's smile looked less like power and more like panic trying to hide. Graham Sterling didn't argue. He didn't trade insults. He just reached into his jacket like a man pulling the pin on a grenade, slow, deliberate, while the entire ballroom held its breath. "Before you call security," he said, voice calm as glass, "you should worry about what I brought with me tonight." Derek barked a laugh that came out too sharp. "What another speech? You think you can hijack my wedding with your money?" Graham stepped to the nearest table and placed a thin black folder on the white linen like it weighed 100 pounds. The closest guests leaned in without realizing they'd moved. Even the string quartet stopped bows hovering mid-air. "This," Graham said, opening it with 2 fingers, "is documentation. Bank transfers, shell companies, offshore accounts." A ripple of confusion ran through the crowd, then a spark of recognition as a few investors' faces tightened. Derek's smile faltered just for a blink, but it was enough. Sloane's perfect posture stiffened. Her eyes flicked to Derek's, searching for an answer he didn't have. Graham continued, each word landing like a gavel. "For over 2 years, Derek Holloway has been siphoning funds from his own company, misusing investor money, laundering it through fake vendors, paying for vacations cars, and tonight's wedding. The room didn't explode right away. It cracked, whispers becoming phone screens, becoming messages, becoming panic. A senator's aide quietly edged toward the exit. A business partner stared at Derek like he'd never met him. Derek went pale. "That's fabricated," he hissed. "You're lying." Graham didn't blink, verified. And beside him, Lena Parker finally exhaled, because the trap Derek set for her wasn't closing on her anymore. It was closing on him. For a heartbeat, Sloane Mercer just stood there frozen in a smile that suddenly looked painted on. Then the whispers hit her like heat from an open oven. He knew. She had to know. Gold digger. Sloane's eyes darted from face to face, reading the room the way she'd always read a runway. Only now the looks weren't admiration. They were judgment, disgust, distance. Her manicured hand slid off Derek's arm as if his sleeve had turned to ash. "Derek," she whispered, voice tight. "Tell them it isn't true." Derek lunged for control, jaw clenched. "It's a setup. He's bluffing. Graham Sterling is trying to destroy me." But Sloane had been around powerful men long enough to recognize the difference between confidence and collapse. Derek's knuckles were white around his champagne flute. Sweat beaded at his hairline. His eyes kept flicking toward the folder like it could bite. And in that moment, Sloane did the math. No yachts, no magazine covers, no charity galas with her name in gold. Just courtrooms headlines, and a man who would drag her down like an anchor. She stepped back, heels scraping the marble. Derek's head snapped toward her. "What are you doing?" Sloane lifted her chin, trying to salvage pride from the wreckage. "I'm not going to drown with you," she said loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "I didn't sign up to marry a criminal." A shocked gasp rippled outward. Cameras swung toward her. Derek's face twisted. "You're nothing without my name." Sloane's mouth hardened. She slid the diamond ring off her finger, held it up for a flashing second, then let it drop. The stone struck marble with a sharp final click, and Sloane Mercer turned and walked away, leaving Derek Holloway standing alone in the ruins of his perfect night. Derek Holloway tried to claw his way back onto the throne, but the room had already turned its back. He straightened his jacket, forced a laugh that sounded like it hurt. "You're all pathetic," he spat, sweeping his glare across the guests. "You believe this trash, you're jealous. Every one of you." His eyes snapped to Lena Parker like a whip. "And you don't forget who you are. You're nothing without me." Lena's chest tightened because she'd heard that line in dark kitchens in parking lots in the silence after slammed doors. But tonight her triplets were pressed against her sides, warm and real, and the lie didn't fit anymore. She took one step forward, then another. Her voice shook at first, but it didn't break. "You keep saying I'm nothing without you," Lena said, eyes locked on Derek. "But the truth is, I became everything without you." A murmur rolled through the ballroom. "When you threw me out, I wasn't pregnant with one baby." She continued, gently pulling the children closer so everyone could see their faces. "I was pregnant with 3. And you left us anyway." The little girl blinked up at Derek. One of the boys tightened his grip on Lena's dress. Lena swallowed hard, then let the words fall clean. "While you wore designer suits and toasted your success, I worked nights cleaning offices. I folded laundry until my hands cracked. I skipped meals so they could eat. I held them through fevers and nightmares and told them they were wanted because you weren't there to do it." Derek opened his mouth, frantic. "They're not mine." But the resemblance was undeniable, and the crowd knew it. Faces hardened. A woman near the front whispered, "How could he?" Lena's eyes glistened, but she stood tall. "You tried to erase me," she said softly. "But you can't erase the truth. It's standing right here holding my hands." Derek Holloway was still roaring, still insisting he could bully the truth back into hiding, when the ballroom doors slammed open hard enough to make the chandeliers tremble. 2 uniformed officers stepped in first, moving with the quiet certainty of men who weren't there for a conversation. Behind them came a detective in a dark suit. Eyes sharp expression, unreadable, holding a folded warrant like it was already finished. A ripple of shock raced through the guests. Phones lifted higher. Someone whispered, "No way." Another voice answered, "It's real." Derek's face drained so fast it looked like the blood had abandoned him. "What is this?" he barked, but the edge in his voice had turned brittle. The detective didn't flinch. "Derek Holloway," he said clearly, loud enough for the front tables to hear, "you are under investigation for embezzlement, tax fraud, and money laundering. We have an arrest warrant." For 1 second, Derek just stared, like his brain refused to accept the scene. Then panic cracked through. "This is a mistake," he shouted, twisting toward the crowd like they were his jury. "Tell them. Someone, tell them who I am." No one moved. The investors who once slapped his back stared at the floor. The politicians eased toward side exits, as if they'd never met him. Even his own friends shifted away, creating space around him like he was contagious. Derek's eyes snapped to Lena Parker, burning. "You did this!" he hissed, the threat thin and desperate. Lena didn't step back. She just tightened her grip on the triplets' hands, her voice low. "No," she said. "You did." The officers took his arms. Metal cuffs clicked shut, loud, final, unforgettable. And as they marched him past the same guests he'd wanted to impress, the truth hit like a spotlight. Derek Holloway didn't leave that ballroom as a groom. He left as a prisoner. Outside the Crystal, Marquis Sloane Mercer was already halfway down the marble steps when the first headlines started forming in real-time flash bulbs, popping like fireworks behind her. She tried to shield her face, but the cameras followed like wolves. "Did you know about the fraud? Are you leaving him on your wedding night? Was it all for money?" Sloane's breath came in sharp, angry bursts. This was supposed to be her coronation, her night of glitter status and a new last name that opened every door. Instead, her designer gown dragged through puddles while strangers screamed questions that felt like punches. She jumped into a waiting car and slammed the door, hands trembling as she unlocked her phone. She dialed fast, too fast. One number she'd kept like an emergency parachute. "Victor," she hissed when he finally answered. "Pick up, I need you." Victor was an investor. Wealthy. Connected. The kind of man Sloane used to smile at just in case. She tried to steady her voice. "Derek lied to me too. I'm free now. We can—" Victor cut her off with a cold laugh. "Free? You're radioactive. Your face is already everywhere. You think I'm going to stand next to that kind of scandal?" His tone sharpened. "My reputation is worth more than your looks. Don't call me again." The line went dead. Sloane stared at the dark screen like it had betrayed her. She tried another call. And another. Friends, contacts, designers, and people who once begged her to attend their parties. One by one, doors slammed shut without ever opening. And in the back seat of that car, surrounded by silence and flashing lights, Sloane finally understood the truth she'd mocked in others. When you build your life on someone else's lie, you fall with them. Inside the ballroom, the chaos didn't fade. When Derek Holloway was dragged out, it echoed. The string lights still glittered. The cake still stood untouched. But the air had changed like a storm had torn the oxygen out of the room. Lena Parker stayed in the center of it all, triplets pressed against her legs, their small fingers clinging like anchors. One of the boys tugged her hand and whispered, almost afraid to believe it, "Mom, are we safe now?" Lena crouched down, pulling all three into her arms. Her throat tightened as years of fear tried to rise, but this time it had nowhere to land. "Yeah," she breathed, kissing the top of the little girl's head. "Yeah, babies, we're safe." Around them, the same people who once laughed at Derek's jokes couldn't meet Lena's eyes. A woman in a pearl necklace dabbed at her cheeks. A man in a tailored suit stared at the floor, shame written across his face. Then slowly the crowd shifted not toward Derek, but toward Lena. An investor stepped forward first, voice rough. "Mrs. Parker, I owe you an apology. I believed him. Others followed, quiet, sincere, uncomfortable truths spilling out between polished smiles. "We were wrong. You didn't deserve any of it. You're incredible." Lena nodded, overwhelmed, not because she needed their approval, she didn't, but because hearing respect where there used to be ridicule felt unreal. Graham Sterling stayed close, steady as stone, not claiming her, not performing, just there. And for the first time in years, Lena didn't feel like she was surviving. She felt like she'd finally crossed the line into something softer, freedom. Graham Sterling waited until the applause softened into something reverent, then reached for the microphone that had been meant for Derek's victory toast. He didn't smile for the crowd. He looked at Lena Parker, really looked at her like she was the only person in the room. Tonight, he said, voice steady, "We all watched truth walk through a door that was supposed to slam in her face." He turned slightly and knelt so he was eye level with the triplets. The ballroom held its breath. "I can't replace what was taken from you," Graham told them gently. "But I can promise you this if you'll let me. I will never walk away." The kids stared wide-eyed. One boy whispered, "For real?" Graham's mouth softened. "For real." Then he stood, pulled a small velvet box from his jacket, and the room erupted into gasps like a wave. Lena's hand flew to her mouth. Her knees almost buckled, not from weakness, but from the shock of being chosen after years of being discarded. Lena Graham said, voice-catching, "For the first time, I thought my heart was finished. Then I met you, and watched you love those kids through every impossible day. You didn't just survive. You rebuilt, and I don't want to admire you from a distance. I want to build with you." He dropped to one knee. "Marry me." Lena's tears fell freely now. She nodded hard, laughing through the sob. "Yes. Yes, I will." The world will try to label you by your worst moment, divorced, broke, forgotten. But your real value is what you do next. Your resilience is your inheritance. Your truth is your power. And if this story hit you somewhere deep, tell me in the comments. Have you ever had to rebuild your life from scratch? Subscribe for more stories that don't just entertain, they remind you what you're made of.